Hello and welcome to the Autism, ADHD and Us 3 podcast with me, Jenny Lucas. We'll be talking all things neurodiversity, including late diagnosis, parenting and everything else that comes in between. This podcast is not intended to be diagnostic. I am not a doctor. These are our personal experiences peppered with research and occasionally the experiences of others. The podcast is intended as a supportive guide through the experience of parenting neurodiverse children as a late diagnosed person, hopefully bringing some relatable stories and laughs along the way. Any relevant links will be in the show notes. Let's get into today's episode.
Hi everyone and welcome to this month's episode of Autism, ADHD and Us 3, and I am delighted to be able to introduce our guest today. We've got Lauren O'Carroll with us from Positively Parenting, who is going to talk about all things parenting children with ADHD, being a late discovered ADHD person herself, and tell us a little bit more about how she supports ADHD parents with their ADHD children in the work that she does. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm really excited.
Thank you for coming along. It is lovely to be talking to you now in 2025, and I'm delighted that I've got you here to talk through these things with, because as a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer myself, who's got two AuDHD children, it is so affirming to have these conversations with other people who are like in a similar boat, which is probably why all of you are listening to the podcast now, because you're in a similar boat to us. So I'm really pleased to have you here, and I want to kick off by asking a question around how you discovered your own ADHD. Sort of how did you end up down that pathway of thinking, oh, that might be me? What happened for you?
So I was actually relatively early compared to most women. So average age being 36, I was 21. So I went through childhood, not being diagnosed, got to university. I'd always struggled with stomach aches and cramping, IBS, that kind of stuff. Never figured out what it was. By the time I got to university, it got really bad and I was being sick after meals and went to see a gastroenterologist who said, look, done some investigations, there's nothing wrong with you. I think you need to go and see a psychiatrist. Sent me to a psychiatrist who was then like, okay, like I'm going to have an hour's meeting with you just to, see what's going on. Probably going to be like anxiety, that kind of thing that's causing these stomach issues. He started asking me all of these questions and then gave me this really big, long questionnaire to fill out. And I was like, and then he was like, you need to get your parents to fill it out too. And I had no idea what this was for. And I'm like, this is really weird. Like, I didn't think that, I thought he'd just be like some shrink guy who was going to make me lie down like in the movies. But no. And then he was like, you need to come back in 2 weeks and have a second appointment. So I went back in 2 weeks and he's like, right, so I'm assuming you've heard of ADHD. And I'm like, yeah, like naughty little boys in the classroom. And he's like, okay,
Classic.
So I'm diagnosing you with ADHD. And I'm like, and he was like, well, you're hyperactive. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And he's like, well, look, you're squeezing your legs closed and you're gripping your thigh and you're trying to stop moving, but you want to move clearly. And all of these other things that we talked about in these questionnaires. And I had no idea it was ADHD. So that was bizarre because I wasn't after an ADHD diagnosis. I was after sort of, somebody to help me with my stomach pain. Actually, after getting diagnosed, I had some CBT. That wasn't terribly helpful, to be honest. I don't think it helps many people with ADHD. Some people, I think it does. And somatic therapy I found completely life-changing, but CBT not so much. But so I kind of went down this journey of discovering I was ADHD, was at university, started taking medication, was like, wow, the world suddenly feels accessible and like, the gloopy kind of tar that I was walking through is just cleared and now it's like air and, it just felt great. And life was great. And, I suddenly was enjoying things and like studying was interesting for the first time and so like everything just got so fucking easy. I was just like, wow, life, it's just like, this is what it's meant to be like. This is amazing. And then I found I didn't actually need medication once I got into work, and I was managing, I was a PA for a bit. That was not a good fit, but then I went into kind of I traveled around the world, then I came back and I was managing advocacy services and when I was managing my own workload, it was great. Didn't really need it. Was fine. Had kids. And because I had to have IVF for my kids. So I had to come off the ADHD meds. Had my first, was really challenging. You know, she was a high needs baby, spirited, you know, all the stuff, you know, went down all the different labels and all the different things that we have.
Yeah.
Just really, really hard. And I had a couple of really hard years with some other stuff that was going on in my life. Then I had my second, who was born in France at 33 weeks and, you know, all sorts of, you know, craziness.
Yeah.
And still, you know, couldn't be on the medication. And so I had a really rocky, like 3 or 4 years. And at that point I was going, there's nothing out there for parents who have ADHD themselves. I am super explosive. I used to get angry when I dropped a pen. It would be like just putting me out of my hyperfocus or putting me out of my, like, where I was trying to go and my rush and my urgency to try and do things. And like even just dropping something would be enough to kind of send me into a meltdown. And suddenly I've got like 2 kids who are also dysregulated and need me to be calm. And I'm reading all these books and they're telling me that I need to be calm. You know, the best way to teach your kids how to be calm is to be calm, and, you know, gentle parenting and all this, which I actually really subscribe to. But how do you do it when when you can't regulate yourself, when you've never learned these skills, and suddenly your stress levels have like gone up a millionfold? And there's nothing there. And there's loads of books about how to put in place really complicated structures for your kids who are neurodivergent or not. But if you're ADHD and you struggle to implement that stuff, there's nothing there.
I have to say that on that point you said there about like the explosiveness, that was for me, that was a big thing that led me to, before I ever realised I was neurodivergent, it led me to question how I wanted to parent differently, and I didn't want to be that explosive mum. And I think there's a lot of shame comes with that in terms of like, you know, and again, like you asked, I subscribe to the idea of gentle parenting and being able to allow children to express themselves and have big feelings and be able to, you know, accommodate those and help them regulate. But when you're a person who's never learned how to deal with your big feelings, and when you have those big feelings, it's like washed over this umbrella of shame. It's a whole minefield of, I'm just a shit parent then, I'm just an angry mum, I'm just, you know, I'm never going to be able to be this. And you see all these lovely families and, oh, don't worry, and all these gentle speaking people, and you're like, oh, how do you get that? Whether you're diagnosed or suspected.
And then it really annoyed me. I was just like, you're obviously not actually like that. You can't actually think like that. That's been my position throughout all of life, because I just assume that, like, well, everyone must have a brain a bit like mine. Like, you know, you must find it really annoying when people are inauthentic and do this stuff. And like, you know, as a kid, I was like seeing people with their mums going like to have coffee with their mum or going shopping with their mum. And I'm like, well, you're obviously pretending you want to do that. Like, surely you don't actually want to do that. You don't actually want to spend time with your mum. Like, I didn't understand it because it was just such a stressful thing for me. And it took a long time and I still struggle with it, to be honest, to understand that, there's just different ways that different brains work. And neither is right or wrong. We're just all different, but we need different strategies.
That's the thing. And I think quite a lot of people that I've seen and certainly in sort of SEND parenting support groups will say that sort of the first line of defence from schools or other services that have been supporting is you need to go on a triple P parenting course, or you need to go on like certain prescribed parenting courses that are just not designed with neurodivergent brains in mind, whether you are autistic, ADHD, otherwise neurodivergent as a parent, or you have children that maybe have those needs or multiple different needs. Kind of those traditional parenting courses just reinforce you're doing it wrong, it's your fault, like that's not how you should be doing it. And I don't think they really help. And I sort of out there in terms of the support that can be accessed through local authorities and things, it's almost like you've got to like jump through the hoops of doing these parenting courses and saying, well, that hasn't worked and that hasn't worked, before you can actually get through to get some proper targeted support for your children in the situation that you find yourself in. So you having a business where you provide that is much needed in the world. There needs to be much more out there like what you provide for parents in terms of the support.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. And what I hear from other people is the same, because I am, you know, I'm a peaceful parenting coach. So I have trained as a peaceful parenting coach within that kind of framework. And what I've done is I've adapted that with my other subset of skills in ADHD, both personal experience and training, to sort of support a neurodivergent side of that. So like, how do you support neurodivergent kids? But also, let's not give parents, because most, the chances are if you've got a neurodivergent child, one of the parents is going to be neurodivergent.
It comes from somewhere.
Exactly. Like, yeah, it could be an aunt or an uncle, but let's assume that most of them, like, there's going to be some neurodivergence there. So let's create frameworks. Let's help people to learn how to parent in a way that's not shaming, not blaming, that they can adapt to suit the way their brains work, the way their households run, the way their families run, the different needs that everyone's got. If you've got autism and you've got ADHD and you've got other neurodivergent conditions in a household, like, probably everyone has very different sensory needs. So me saying, okay, well, we're going to do a sensory circuit might be great for one child. It's not going to necessarily work for the other, or they're going to need to do different things. So actually, it's, if I tell you to go and implement this one sensory circuit for this one child, and then this one for this child, and then this thing for you, and this thing, like, you're never going to do it. So we need to sort of strip it back and look at what's really important for that individual family, rather than like going, I'm going to just give you these prescribed rules and you're going to follow them. And actually, a lot of those courses, some of them are okay, but a lot of them are not even giving you the sort of science-backed stuff that we know now. Like some of the things that I think Triple T talk about, kind of timeouts and stuff, that comes from research on pigeons and chimpanzees. Like we study brains now, right? We've got brain imaging. We know that doesn't work. Like, there's been decades of neuroscience studying child's brains, child development. We know that sending a kid for a timeout is detrimental, particularly if they're a child who's likely to become, likely to struggle with shame and whatever else because they're neurodivergent. And actually, we know that behaviour is generally because of a dysregulated nervous system. So why would you further dysregulate that nervous system by sending a child away and out of connection with you? It just doesn't make any sense. But these courses are teaching parents that. So it's kind of making their parenting worse. And it's also so shaming to the parent. It's like, well, we don't believe that your child has ADHD. We don't believe your child has autism. We don't believe your child has PDA. We don't believe whatever the thing is that we're assuming here. We think it's that you're a bad parent, and we need to check that first by sending you on a parenting course. And if in a year's time they're still showing signs and you're doing all the stuff that actually is detrimental to your child, if you're doing all of that and they're still neurodivergent, then okay, fine, we'll assess them. Probably in another 2 years. It's just a mess. The whole system is a mess.
It is.
No wonder parents are lost.
It's exactly. And it's being in a position where you can just believe people when they come to you and say, this is what's happening. Because they'll be like, oh, well, have they got a bedtime routine? And how are they sleeping? And if maybe you got them off the screens, and it's like, no, actually, none of those things are causing the issues that we're having. Just actually listen to what we've got to say. It can be really invalidating, I think, when you try and access some of these services. And those are the first kind of questions, like, oh, well, do you have a bedtime routine? Well, yes. Or whatever the case may be, like the bedtime routine is not the one size fits all that's going to solve all of the issues for these families.
Exactly. That was what my point was going to be, because, I see parents all the time talking about sort of like, how do we support your family to meet whatever needs are there. I might tell one family to increase screen time. I might tell another family to completely take away screen time. I might tell one family to completely relax on bedtimes, and I might tell another family that they need to kind of have much more stricter bedtime routines. It depends on so many factors. We can't give this one size fits all. You tell a parent of a PDA child that you need to completely strip out screens and that's going to fix all their problems. It's going to take the whole family into kind of like complete chaos and meltdown, and no one's going to be regulated and no one's going to be able to support anyone, and everything's going to go south. So it's just so dependent on each person, and parents tend to know their kids. They tend to know what they need, and if a parent's fighting for diagnosis, I did a reel on TikTok about a month ago, and it was about sending kids on these courses, and it sort of went a bit crazy. And loads of parents were sort of saying what we're saying. And then there was quite a few Senkos and other people within the education industry. So either Senkos or people who work for CAMS or wherever else, who were saying, no, parents just make it up. They do it as an excuse for behaviour. One Senko was, and I've actually did a reel about this, and that went crazy as well, because I did it as a response to him. And I said, because he said, I've been a Senko for 25 years. ADHD doesn't exist. And he was backing.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't exist. It's bad parenting. And it was just like, you know, you don't say that to an audience of neurodivergent parents.
No.
Some parents.
And but it's scary, isn't it, to think that there are professionals out there who are working with our children on a regular basis who hold those opinions, like wholeheartedly. Doesn't matter what kind of CPD or training that they've been on. I've made up my mind that it's junk food, or I've made up my mind that it's bad parenting, or too many numbers, or
it's hard to argue. And we're already so sort of confused ourselves. Like, it's such an isolating place to be when you've got a SEND child and you're like, I've got to fight for their needs, but school are telling me one thing, someone else is telling me something else. Like, my mother-in-law's saying this and this, you know. You're already questioning yourself so much. You're already like made to feel shit, whether you like it or not, just because of the way that your family is. And then you get that, and it's like, you know, people give up. People just assume that they're being bad, and then they give them even worse advice. It's really sad.
I mean, I have to say that sort of in my world and in what I do with people, I advocate for, and essentially the headline is everyone just needs to stop giving a fuck about what everyone else thinks about them. Like, just stop giving a fuck about other people's opinions. That is my business in a phrase, in a sentence, and that's my mantra. And in a way, when it comes to parenting your own children and what works for your family, it's the same thing. If you find strategies that work for you, and if you go out for dinner and the kids are on screens because everybody's happy and settled and occupied, and you get to therefore have a nice meal together as a family and you enjoy that. If you've got some old couple that tat about the amount of screen time, just as what's the name, Mel Robbins, is it Mel Robbins at the moment that's saying the let them theory, just let them have their opinions. It means nothing to you because you're doing what you know works for your family. But that, I think, in the society that we live in, and certainly the society we've been brought up in, like, holding other people's opinions as more valuable than our own is kind of like the value we've been taught growing up. You know what I mean? It's kind of all the appearances, and we should listen to the professionals, and we should take on the opinions of other people. And I'm not sitting here saying I'll ditch all the advice the professionals give you. What do they know? However, like you said earlier on, as parents, we tend to know what works and what doesn't work for our children. And when we're getting advice about things, already we know, oh yeah, that sounds interesting, we haven't tried that, or nah, that's just, I know for a fact that's just not going to work. So it's trusting that gut instinct and trying to let go of that judgment that other people are, because everybody loves a wee judge. Do you know what I mean? They love having a wee judgy opinion on other people's lifestyles and the way that they choose to live. So trying to let that go, I think, is really important when it comes to trusting your gut and parenting in a way that works for your family, regardless of what your mother-in-law thinks. Many of us have got a mother-in-law that has an opinion about how we are raising our children. And I'm sure many of us have got opinions about how they raise their children because we're married to them. But yeah, it's trying to let that judgment go.
I think one thing though that's really interesting is how this happens for women, because first we've got it's a female experience, right? That kind of people pleasing thing. We're taught to people please, and you know, then we spend our adulthoods, if we're that way inclined, trying to unpick all of that we've been taught. But I think when you become a parent, and particularly if you become a parent of a neurodivergent child, the chances are sleep's going to be crap. You're going to be exhausted, you're going to be sleep deprived, you're going to be like full of anxiety, completely broken, reactive. And then, you know, you and your partner, because you're neurodivergent relationships are more challenging. They might start questioning how you're parenting. You might start questioning yourself or questioning how they're parenting. And everything kind of escalates, right? And then you might find out, oh my God, I've got ADHD, or oh my God, I've got autism, because that's about the age that we figure that out, or when we're in perimenopause, again, a time of huge doubt. And so we try and address that doubt by reading all the parenting books, listening to all the podcasts, feeding ourselves with all this information which our parents didn't have. And sometimes I'm annoyed my parents didn't have it because of all the trauma that I've got from them not knowing this stuff. But actually, there's so much information that it becomes so overwhelming, and we lose that ability to listen to our intuition, and we lose that trust in ourselves because we're looking externally for the answers. And I can't remember who it was who said that. I think it might have been Brené Brown or Glennon Doyle or even Mel Robbins. Someone talks about the fact that we lose that knowing. I think it's maybe, but that knowing that we've got to sort of like just really lean into what we intrinsically know, because we do know the answers, but we just don't believe in ourselves anymore. It's about kind of getting that confidence, and I guess that's what your work's all about as well. Is, just showing up as you and being and celebrating being you. But to do that, you've got to have confidence in who you are and believe in who you are. And you've probably spent your life being told that who you are is too much or not enough.
Yeah, I think that's a difficulty, I think, as certainly I found as a late diagnosed person. I was 37, I think, so I was around the average age of diagnosis when I found out I was autistic and ADHD in the same year. And that idea of, well, who am I? What is my identity, and who am I under the mask, and what is the mask, and what's the autism, and what's the ADHD, and what's my personality like? It is, I know that there's so many people out there who you get that diagnosis, whether you're a parent or not, and it's like, oh my God, you reevaluate your whole life, and you kind of go, well, who am I under all of these things? What do these things now mean for me in my life? So you're right, then tuning in to be like, well, what is my gut instinct? What are my issues? What are my needs? How do I meet them? Like, that is a whole piece of work. And again, speaking as a late diagnosed person who functions, has had a full-time job and a career, has parents, children, is married, can drive, all of those kind of, it can't be that bad then, things that professionals will say to you that you can cope with. When you then go and seek advice from people and there is none, I took my diagnosis reports to the GP, and the GP said, I haven't had time to read this, the report's too long, but they normally put a list of websites on the final page. I suggest that you go away and check some of those out to find support. There is nothing for you in this area. And you walk out and you go, great, well, now I'm fucked. Like, what do I do now? So it's a real process in terms of like finding your gut instinct about these things and about parenting your children. And I'd be really interested to know actually, in terms of, because you already knew you were ADHD when you had your children, and I didn't know until both of mine were, I think my youngest was probably like 5. So I'd probably done a significant amount of like trauma building in them in terms of my parenting style before I started to figure myself out. And I can see from I have conversations with my oldest, who's 12 now, she can almost like pinpoint the time in her life where I changed as a parent, because I grew self-awareness. Essentially, I became curious about, why am I reacting this way? Why is that behaviour triggering me? Why is this bothering me so much? And that was even pre sort of having that realisation that neurodivergency was anywhere on the horizon for us in our family. It was that curiosity that sparked it. And she can almost see the 2 different mummies that she's had sort of in her lifetime. My youngest was too little. You mentioned that parenting was really tough for a period of time, particularly when you didn't have access to the medication. How did that play out for you? So what were the sort of things that you were finding really difficult in that period of time?
So I think my reactivity, being sleep deprived, because we know being sleep deprived, sleep is hell. And it's brilliant, right? Sleep is a brilliant drug. If you're neurodivergent, you need a lot of it. Actually, as a child, you don't actually need as much sleep. And actually, maybe even as an adult, you don't need as much sleep. You do need the sleep that you need. And I had a child who woke up every 40 minutes. Both my kids were in NICU, one for 2 weeks, the other one for 4 weeks. But, neither of them really slept very well. Second one, I gave up all the kind of trying to get her in her cot and all of that. The first one, looking back on it, I was probably a little ill. I was so obsessed with her sleep. I would time every feed. I would, and I think it was because part of it was my neurodivergence. I needed a hyperfocus. So she was my hyper focus. So I would time every feed on an app. How much on this boob, how much on this boob. Then I would then she had to be asleep at this time. So I'd be walking her in the pram or in the sling to make her sleep, because she wouldn't sleep in a cot. She wouldn't sleep in a cot anyway, but I wouldn't even dare to try it because she wouldn't fall asleep at the right time, and certainly not for long enough. And then I'd walk for 40 minutes, and I would go absolutely ballistic if somebody was to beep a horn, or if a car was to pull up next to me when I'm walking, because I'm like, don't wake the baby. I went on holiday with a massive humidifier because I convinced myself that was helping her sleep. So my hand luggage was a humidifier the size of a traveling backpack. The biggest one I could fit into the hold. I was obsessed. And when she started nursery, that was challenging because she never wanted to be away from me. But I went back to work in the NHS. I used to manage the breast unit at that time. And I remember just feeling really oh my God, this is nice. Like I'm having a cup of tea. And it was almost like I could breathe out. I could exhale. I'd been so tense and clenched for an entire year. And going to work was just oh my God, I'm free. It just felt incredible. But then I'd go back and it would be the same. And she has struggled. She struggled a lot. I mean, I now think she's got an ADHD diagnosis. I now think probably got some autism, PDA, something like that in the picture. There's definitely sensory processing disorder, and she's got an alphabet already diagnosed, but I think we've got some other things too. And not understanding that, I think I was just desperate to sort of hang it on something so that I had some validation that it was hard. And I remember getting really violent, not violent with her, not properly violent, but getting so frustrated, I'd smack the bed next to her, just go out to sleep, or putting her down in her cot and just go to sleep, because she'd just be, an hour or two just screaming in the middle of the night, and I'd had an hour's sleep in the last 2 days. And I remember on the floor in her bedroom, because she was in a cot in a bedroom right next to ours when she was about 9 months old. And, I could never leave. So I'd always be sitting there with a hand, and then I'd try and creep out, and then she'd cry. And I was sitting on her floor, with the phone under her cot so she couldn't see the light on it, Googling anger management. I was I've got to sort myself out. I am a terrible person. I don't know what to do anymore. I might really hurt her.
That's terrifying, isn't it? That's so terrifying, because you think, I don't quite know if and when I'm going to lose control at any point. That is really scary.
That I love so much.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah, it's just terrifying. And also, I was so resentful of my husband, who
got to go to work every day and could sleep and didn't have to be the one that was feeding.
Got to use work as an excuse for not being up in the night, or the fact that
anything.
I mean, but I was so fixated on, I've got to do this perfectly, that I had to breastfeed. Then I had to stop breastfeeding because I wanted to do IVF, because I wanted to give her a sister, and that was another huge wrench for me, because I was but then I can't breastfeed her, and then it's going to be really bad in that way. And obviously, because I'd read about stuff, I'd gone down into this kind of my idea of perfect parenting is now, doing everything completely naturally, except I had a cesarean. It was an emergency, but hey ho. And in retrospect, I look at that and I go, none of that was healthy for her. If I had been in a rational mind, I might have made different decisions which would have been better for her, and maybe that would have included a bottle from earlier on. She probably wouldn't have taken it because it wasn't me, and she was strong-willed, or spirited, I think I called her back then. As I had another daughter as well, then the sort of sibling rivalry comes in, because for her it's my eldest, it's she's being replaced, and there was a lot there that I could have done differently and better. And I did know a lot about peaceful parenting at that point, but although I tried to implement the strategies, I lost my dad at that time, so I was grieving. He was my secure attachment figure, so suddenly I was alone in the world without that connection, which was really hard. And I just felt so isolated and so lonely, and I felt everybody was blaming the behaviour of my child on my parenting, because I was too soft, because I was too, I just gave in and allowed her to, and I knew in my heart of hearts that she was doing the best she could and I was doing the best I could, and that we were both neurodivergent. And I've known she was neurodivergent since she was like 6 months old.
Yeah.
But I think one of the problems was that I saw her as being mini me. And actually she's not. I think there's a very different neurodivergent profile for her. My youngest is actually quite a lot like me, but she's very different. And I think because we're similarly emotionally triggered, I sort of placed a lot of like my understanding of myself on her, and therefore didn't possibly give her some of the things that she needed, because I was so desperate to reparent myself. I was seeing her as me and trying to meet my needs, and I think that's really, really normal. I see it a lot in my clients. I think if you know you've been if you already know that you're neurodivergent, it's very easy, because you've done a bit of that work and you've got an understanding of yourself, and you're really kind of like, I am not going to do that to my child, and you can overdo that as well. So it's a really complicated place, and I think the thing that I see most in people is just this sense of like feeling completely misunderstood. We felt like that all our lives anyway, and then you go into this really tricky space and nothing is quite speaking to you. And so that's why I think community is so important. So once I found, and I actually created my own because I needed it, community of parents who are neurodivergent, and not just ADHD, but any kind of neurodivergence, or who have neurodivergent kids. Again, ADHD is the common thread, but it never travels alone. So, you're not going to have somebody that's got ADHD. I mean, you might, but like 10%. It's unlikely. But having them and having that space to just kind of go, oh my God, this happened today and I just need to run. And having people who go, I get it. And do you know what? This happened to me. And we're all jumping in with our own stories. And it's not like, oh, they're trying to steal the limelight. It's like, okay, well, you're validating me. And, we get it. Because we've got the same understanding of how we communicate, and you suddenly don't feel alone. And and that is so, so helpful. So, when I bring clients on group calls and they're just like, oh my God, like you've got it really hard too, and so have you. And suddenly you're not sitting on your own in your house, struggling with your partner and your kids and going, it's just me and everyone else has it easy because I see everyone else skipping out of school. You realize that it's not just you. And that I find that very helpful, very validating.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point in terms of that validation, isn't it? I personally, once I found out about my own neurodivergence, I found online community a really validating space, because suddenly you're seeing people and you're going, oh my God, you're experiencing that. Oh, you feel like that about that too, or you're struggling with that. And I think when we're talking about parenting, it's one of those areas that you enter into life where everyone has an opinion on how to do it right. Oh, I did this with my kids. Oh, you should try this. Oh, you need to get this thing. And everywhere you look, someone's going to tell you something that you're doing wrong, or another thing that you have to try. And it just adds to that sort of further frustration, particularly if you've already tried all the things. And as you say there, your first daughter sort of slept in 40-minute chunks. Like, that is so common, where you'll see people that have children who struggle with sleep. And there's like a million different bits of advice about what you should do about getting them to sleep. Make sure they have a bath before bed. And are you reading them a story? And have you got the dim lighting? And have you got the blackout blinds? And it's like, I literally have done all of those things. Like, you're making me feel really invalid right now.
You've made the bedtime routine an hour and a half long. It's like, yes, I'm still in trouble for that, by the way, because it's still an hour and a half long. And it doesn't work.
Well, if it works, it works. Yeah, well, that's it.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's nice, isn't it? I think there'll probably be a lot of people listening who feel that sense of validation in terms of lots of the things that you've mentioned you found difficult personally with your parenting. Like, even when we were talking there and you were talking about the outbursts that you'd be having, and I found that especially with my eldest, because everything was a first time. I'd never been a parent before, and everything was the first time. So when she was first going through, or when the sleep routine changed or anything like that happened for the first time, in my little neurodivergent brain that I didn't know I had at the time, it was like, oh my God, this is it now. She's just never going to sleep ever again, and my life is completely fucked, and I'm just going to feel like this all the time. Or, that's it. She stopped having a bottle, or do you know what I mean? It was just everything was so massive. And then when I had the second one, it's almost like, okay, well, I've got a blueprint now. Oh, well, she's doing that at different times. Oh, she's not following the same sleep routine, or she's not. And it was just like, it was easier, but it wasn't, because you've got that first one, and you know what it's like. They're all completely different. All of our children, no matter how we bring them up, no matter whether they come from the same two parents, they're all individual human beings. Ours particularly have an individual neurodivergent profile. Both of mine are AuDHD, but they're both different flavours of AuDHD. To me, being AuDHD, like, it's so individual. And it can feel, like you say, really, really lonely, especially if you have a partner who is the one that's out working. And, when you talk about resenting them, been there, yeah, been there. We had many conversations where I would say things like, it's all right for you, you just get to fuck off out to work every day, you just get yourself ready and then you go to work. And, the conversation, oh, I've been at work all day, I am working. And it's like, it's difficult, isn't it, when you're kind of coming at it from two different places. But I I had a few moments in that conversation there where I identified hugely with what you were saying. And what I want to ask you then, thinking about the work that you do with families, is if you had a sort of top 3 things that people come away from working with you having added into their lives, or having, I don't want to say solved, because it's not like we have people that have got issues to be solved. Do you know what I mean? Our children are not problems to be solved. But it's what are the top 3 takeaways that people tend to have when they have worked with your service that they didn't have before they came to you?
I think a huge one is permission to do things their way, and just an understanding of their kids and themselves, and just that understanding of how we all work, how the nervous system works, and permission to respect that, really, amongst sort of above all else, really. Like, if somebody's dysregulated and they're having a meltdown, you've got permission to allow them to have that meltdown. You can be with them, you can be present with them, but those feelings are fine. And actually, if somebody's flipped their lid and they're in a meltdown, you can't talk them out of it. It's not going to happen. You can read all the scripts and all the parenting books. Trust me, I've read all of them. I've tried all of them. None of them work. And actually, it's permission to be like, you can put those books down, because then they're not going to work for your neurodivergent child. You have to believe yourself, and you've got to sort of, just do it your way, and that's okay. The other thing is, if I work with couples, one of the huge things is around uniting them in the perspective that I sort of talk about, because we'll often have like one parent who's like possibly a little bit, I mean, like I am naturally, actually, like a bit of a people pleaser, and I can go on to a bit of a like pendulum, so I can sort of flip from permissive to then like authoritarian, so I'm like, yes, I'm so gentle, I'm so nice, but I'm almost kind of like letting you get your way a little bit, because I'm scared, sort of walking on eggshells all over you, and then I lose my shit and shout at you. Whereas actually what we want to be is authoritative and hold our line a little bit, but do that respectfully, and sort of have high expectations for our child, but give them loads of support. That's kind of the ideal. But again, permission to have different expectations at different times, and for different expectations for different children. It's not, there's no sort of standard that you need to follow, and you don't need to meet certain milestones. You just need to help your child to be who they are and where they're supposed to be now. So I think that's another one. And then the last one, I guess, is around kind of an understanding of what they need to do for themselves to be able to show up for their kids. And that's probably the most important thing. So, where is your battery? Like, how full is your battery right now? Are you waking up in the morning and you're exhausted, and you've already like overexerted yourself yesterday, and you've got to go through a full day of parenting 3 neurodivergent children on your own, and your battery is at like 3%? If your phone battery is at 3%, would you go out for the day with an empty phone without any charger and expect it to carry on? No, you're expecting it to die. You like if you
Yeah.
you may well forget to bring it with you, and that might be a disaster. But you know that your phone's not going to last, but yet we expect ourselves to be able to get up, get on with it, not lose our shit. You are going to lose your shit because that 3% is going to go quick, and you're not having a chance to recharge. So how do you recharge yourself? Is that with, are you meeting physical needs? Are you doing something that you enjoy every day? Are you allowing yourself to rest? I mean, we are not very good at allowing ourselves to rest. We may think we're resting, but we're actually just delving into another
doom scrolling.
Might make us feel great, like something like this. This will really lift me.
Yeah.
This is one of the ways that I meet my needs, actually, is by having these conversations, because it really fires up my energy. But for somebody else, it might be quite depleting, and they might need to go and rest afterwards. So it's, what are you doing to meet your needs, and how are you consistently doing that? So almost kind of writing a schedule with them to make sure that they are doing that, and doing it with their partner, so that their partner can make sure that they do it and hold them accountable, and they don't feel guilty. Because again, if you're neurodivergent and a parent, you're probably going to feel really guilty about taking any time for yourself, especially if you're
definitely
a woman. Because we're so used to trying harder than everybody else to just maintain the same level of expectation. And so, it's like to rest, to stop, to do something for us feels like, but I'll get found out. Actually, you do need more. And actually, we've already been found out, and it's fine. It's a great thing to find out. So I think they're the things, really. Looking after yourself, permission to actually just lean into who your family is. And I can't remember the other one I said.
Working with your partner. If you've got a partner, working with your partner.
Getting that kind of alignment.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's really, really useful. And obviously I'm going to put all your links in the show notes, so people can find, we just go straight into the show notes and click on accessing your website and things. But if people have listened to this and gone, right, I need to get on Lauren's radar, we need to do some work with our family, what are the best ways that people can get through to sort of having a consultation with you to find out what you offer?
So any of the social medias, platforms that I've got, they can contact me on, or email me, lauren@positivelyparenting.co.uk. I'm also in the process of getting a book published for parents.
Nice.
So that's very exciting. Typically ADHD, I'm stuck at the 90% mark. So I've written it. I just need to edit it and get it to the publishers. And I've not looked at it since the beginning of December, but I will get back on it because I spoke to some publishers yesterday. But that's a really exciting book, because that is speaking to that note of there isn't anything out there for parents who are neurodivergent themselves. This is more specifically ADHD, because it's kind of like my experience and my clients' experiences of ADHD. But probably certainly with AuDHD, you would get a lot of validation from it, I think. And probably actually, if you're autistic, there's a lot in there, maybe not the same experiences in terms of the way that your neurodivergence plays out, but the way that it's received and the sort of trauma that it gives you, that kind of complex trauma, paper cut type, cutting you down by paper cuts throughout your life, I think will resonate with people. And I really hope that someone writes one about being an autistic parent as well, because I think there is differences, and an AuDHD parent, because again, that's a very different reality. Sometimes I feel like it's the best of both worlds, and also
sometimes, yes. It's absolutely fascinating. I have to say, having an AuDHD brain is fascinating. And it's funny you should say that about writing parenting as an AuDHD parent, because that may well be something that I've got in the works at the moment. Well, potentially, I'm writing another one at the moment for supporting late diagnosed women, particularly in the first year post-diagnosis, because there's just nothing out there for us support-wise. That's why my business started. But next on the list is AuDHD parenting, because it's quite a unique experience. It really is. And it's like you say, building that community and knowing that there are other people out there who are having similar experiences to you, and that you're not alone in that, is just actually hugely hopeful. Do you know what I mean? It just gives you some validation that it's going to be okay. We're all going to make it, or it's all going to be all right. We're not going to completely fuck our kids up for the whole of the rest of their lives. So it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on the podcast. And like I say, all of Lauren's contact details are going to be in the show notes, so you can go and grab those and follow her on socials as well. So I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.